Hi, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for joining the call today. I wanted to give an update on the work we've been doing with the Coastal Waves NGD with the goal of bringing wave modeling capabilities into E3SM. And specifically, we've been working with the WaveWatch 3 model from NOAA and incorporating that into E3SM. And one of the key capabilities that we've developed recently is the unstructured global mesh capability that we're excited about and hope that capability will bring a lot of we'll be able to interface with a lot of different E3SM science questions. The role of waves in the coupled climate system. Waves are really this interfacial process that controls a lot of fluxes between the atmosphere and the ocean. And these include things like vertical mixing, when the Stokes drift caused by waves interacts with the currents in upper oceanic boundary layer. It can create Langmuir turbulent cells, which mix the upper layer of the ocean. The waves also alter the air-sea momentum flux due to the form drag of the waves. Also, white capping of waves changes the albedo of the ocean surface and reflects incoming radiation. And then in the marginal ice zone, waves are damped by sea ice, but they're also one of the main determinants of sea ice flow size in the marginal ice zone. And if we look specifically at the role of waves in coastal flooding, when waves break in the coastal ocean, the momentum lost is transferred to the water column and creates a setup of water near the coast. And so in conjunction with climate drivers that we get from E3SM, we're interested in using the wave modeling capability to assess flooding into the future under climate change, sea level rise scenarios. And just as an illustration on the right, this plot is the difference between a hurricane hindcast of Hurricane Ike with and without the effect of waves. So you can see that some places there's up to 3 meters difference of inundation that is just due to the effect of waves. So they can be quite important for coastal problems. Also, there's a trend in the global wave climate. There's a science paper in 2011 that looked at altimeter measurements of waves and wind speeds over a couple decades, and they found that the highest percent year-over-year increase of significant wave height was occurring in the Southern Ocean and Northern Atlantic regions. And so especially at high latitudes, waves are becoming a more important, more prominent part of the climate system. So I wanted to kind of give an overview of what we mean by modeling waves. If you look at the energy spectrum of waves in the ocean, it kind of breaks down into two parts, one being the long waves to the right, which are things like tides, tsunamis, storm surges, and these have periods on the order of hours. And then there's wind waves to the left. These are periods on the order of seconds to tens of seconds. And so the wavelengths and periods of these wind waves are too short to be feasibly modeled with current or even future global ocean model resolutions. And so it really requires a separate modeling approach. And the approach that's commonly used for global ocean type scenarios is a phased average paradigm. And so you're modeling the distribution of energy in a frequency direction spectrum as opposed to directly modeling perturbations to the sea surface. And I'll go into that a little more. So basically, the spectral description of waves in the ocean, you're assuming that the actual sea surface state is a summation of sinusoidal components of different directions and frequencies. And what you're modeling is the distribution of energy amongst these different components. And so you end up getting is a plot that looks like this on the right, where this is the distribution of energy in frequency and direction space. And these plots can tell you a lot about the local sea state properties at a given point. So how is this energy spectrum modeled? Well, in the presence of an ocean current, the energy density actually isn't conserved, and it's the action density, which is related to the energy density, that's the conserved quantity. And so this depends on latitude, longitude, frequency, and direction. And so the equation that's being solved in WaveWatch is this conservation equation below, where we have advection by the group velocity of the waves and ocean currents. There's a term for frequency dispersion, which stretches the waves, and then a refraction term that bends waves. And then all of the physics for production, dissipation, and nonlinearities are all parameterized on the right-hand side of the equation. And so these are things like atmosphere-wave interactions. So that models the growth of the waves under atmospheric forcing, dissipation due to white capping and bottom interactions. There's nonlinear wave interactions that are parameterized, wave scattering that occurs in the marginal ice zone, for example, when waves are reflecting off of individual ice flows. That's a parameterized quantity. Then there's depth-limited braking, which occurs in the coastal ocean. So all of these different physics interactions are parameterized in this phased average paradigm. So WaveWatch is solving for this action density spectrum, which is related to the energy density spectrum. And so how do you relate that to quantities that you would expect to observe for waves? And you do that by integrating over this frequency direction spectrum in different ways to get things like the significant wave height, which is the average of the highest 1/3 of the waves, the mean direction, mean wave period, things like that can be found by integrating over frequency and direction space to get these mean quantities at a particular point in space. So by looking at this frequency direction plot, like I said, you can tell a lot about what the local wave properties are. For example, here, this blot of energy is indicative of a swell state, which are long period waves that are generated by distant storms that propagate long distances and organize themselves into really coherent wave packets. And then there's wind seas that are locally generated waves that are typically shorter period and more spread out in the direction frequency space. And so all these mean wave parameters can also be derived from observations, which makes it nice for comparison between modeled waves and observed waves. So we take a look at the global wave spectra. We've done work with machine learning on this project to kind of classify time averaged wave spectra. And so the upper left plot has colors that correspond to representative spectra of the corresponding colored box. And so that's kind of the best fit of what the average wave spectra in that location looks like. This is a way to really see kind of globally how the wave spectra change spatially and also temporally if you average over different periods. Below, there's the correlation coefficient between the color, the representative cluster, and the actual modeled wave state. As you can see at the seams of these different transitions between the clusters, you get the highest error. But it's a nice way of kind of showing the overall way that the spectra behave in the global ocean. So now moving on to more specific WaveWatch 3 considerations. The meshes for WaveWatch 3, there's been several different configurations that have been developed alongside WaveWatch 3. Traditionally, it's been run in a structured configuration with structured lat-long meshes. There's a lot of use of nesting for NOAA's operational forecasting. So this is their current operational forecasting mesh, where you have 1/2 degree resolution globally, and then along the continental US, you have 4-minute resolution that's nested in a structured way. The disadvantage to this mesh is that there's a pole singularity, and as you go closer to the poles, you get smaller and smaller grid cells, which incurs a pretty high CFL constraint. And so a lot of times these meshes just cut off at a certain latitude towards the Arctic. To compensate for that, there are spherical multi-cell grids which have been developed, and these kind of switch to a new resolution as you go closer and closer to the pole, and the latitude lines converge towards the pole. And so you kind of get this transition zone where all of a sudden the grid cells get too small, and then you go to a larger grid spacing on in towards the pole. There's still a little cap here that covers the North Pole to avoid a pole singularity. And more recently, there's been triangular meshes for regional problems like hurricanes that are now starting to be used more frequently. And so as a part of this project, we've extended these regional meshes to global coverage for use in E3SM. Just to go over a little of the details of integrating WaveWatch into E3SM, WaveWatch is now available on GitHub, and so the latest version has been made a submodule in E3SM. WaveWatch is unique in that the source code that it ships with isn't compilable code, and so there are some considerations with integrating this into the E3SM build system. The code looks like kind of in the left hand where you have these preprocessor directives, which they call switches, and when you compile the code with WaveWatch's build system, you have a switch file which specifies which of these lines basically gets included. And so there's this pre-processing step on the WaveWatch source code before you get the compilable version. So this all had to be considered in incorporating WaveWatch into the E3SM build system. There's also several auxiliary programs that ship along with the WaveWatch repository, especially important for creating the inputs to WaveWatch that specify the grids. They're all binary format that come out of the grid pre-processing. And so it's important to have these come along in the repository also and be integrated into the the E3SM workflow. This is a slide that we did a hindcast of waves from June to August 2005 using reanalysis wins on structured lat-long meshes. And the mean percent error is on the y-axis here. And on the x-axis, we have all the stations that we had observations for. And we've organized these from deepest on the left to shallowest on the right. And so I think this really highlights the importance of regional refinement for wave modeling. In that for the deep stations, we did 3 different resolutions here. For the deep stations, there's really no benefit in terms of accuracy with increasing resolution. Whereas for these shallow stations, which are mostly coastal areas, they benefit greatly from the increased resolution. And it's oftentimes required to get kind of the same accuracy as you get in the deep ocean. And so to me, this really says that we can balance our accuracy and cost with these regionally refined meshes and run course in the deep ocean where resolution isn't buying us anything, and then have more resolution in the shallower areas where it really makes a difference. So going along with that, here are the 2 global configurations that I'm going to show results for in the coming slides. One is a quasi-uniform 50-kilometer mesh, and another is a regionally refined Delaware Bay mesh that has 240-kilometer global resolution down to 4 kilometers in Delaware Bay. And this has been developed as a part of the NISMA Coastal Project, which is an LDRD project at Los Alamos. So when we validate these meshes, we're comparing the same June to August 2005 time period with the half-degree reanalysis wins, and comparing to that same NDBC buoy data set. So we have plots for significant wave height, dominant wave direction, and dominant wave period. I'm comparing 2 different resolutions of unstructured with the half-degree structured, which is the finest structured mesh that we ran and I showed results for in the previous slides. And so you can see pretty good agreement, not only with observations, but also amongst the 3 resolutions. And so this kind of gives us confidence that these global configurations that we've been developing give us similar results to the structured configuration. And of course, there's totally different numerics, so we'd expect some differences. But this kind of gives us some confidence to move forward. If you'll notice, the significant wave height observations are always kind of the cleanest, and we get really noisy, sometimes observations with wave direction and wave period. And I haven't smoothed these or filtered them in any way. And so this is just a comparison with the raw data. We seem to do a pretty good job. This is moving to another station in the Northeast. And again, pretty much the same story, matching wave height, wave direction, and wave period pretty well with the unstructured meshes. Here in the Caribbean, we have a little bit of a mismatch between wave direction, but the period and the heights look pretty good. And then just to show kind of a different station on the other side of the US, off the coast of Alaska, again, pretty good agreement between the resolutions and with observations. And so now moving into these regionally refined global meshes, this is a comparison for Hurricane Sandy in 2012, where we've used a little bit higher resolution reanalysis product. And these are comparisons between two different unstructured resolutions and the half-degree structured. And as you look through these, you'll see that there's really not a whole lot of difference between any of them. So the half-degree structured is pretty much just as accurate as the other unstructured ones. But the performance is quite a bit better for the unstructured meshes, because for these cases, we have very coarse global resolution and refinement in the region of interest, whereas with the structured, that we have that resolution everywhere. So moving on, we're modeling the peak waves of Sandy really well, and the direction and periods during the storm really well. Here, the structured version does a little bit better with significant wave height, just because probably the regional refinement outside of the unstructured refinement is higher in the structured version. But again, we're getting pretty good performance increases moving to this unstructured mesh. So in terms of coupling WaveWatch with other E3SM components, WaveWatch already uses script internally for mapping its nested grids. And so we've been able to repurpose that to generate mapping files for E3SM. So there is an auxiliary program, a preprocessor program for WaveWatch 3 called WW3 Grid, which typically takes in the mesh file and some extra model configuration parameters. And it creates this binary file, which is the main input to WaveWatch 3 instead of E3SM. So we've modified this to also include the script information for the grids, so that we can combine it with other script files and create the mapping files that are necessary to create new composites for E3SM. So the WaveWatch 3 unstructured advection scheme is a residual distribution scheme. And so in terms of the script files, it takes the median, or takes the center of the cell as the triangle nodes, and then the corners of the cells are the center points of the neighboring elements. And so I'm going to show just kind of the same plots, but for a different reason. This is a comparison between standalone WaveWatch 3 with WaveWatch 3 running inside of E3SM coupled to a data atmosphere. And so here we've used the mapping files from the previous, explained in the previous slide, along with a higher resolution data atmosphere that we've incorporated to be consistent with the reanalysis product that we are using. And so by comparing these two different runs, this is basically showing us that how we're coupling WaveWatch to the atmosphere is giving us the same as we would expect with the standalone run. So we ran the E3SM run for a little longer, but the overlap here once with the standalone run is pretty right on, with some minor discrepancies due to interpolating from a field output from E3SM versus having the actual point output from the standalone WaveWatch code. And so these are just the different stations that I showed before, showing the overlap between these two configurations. And so to summarize and wrap up here, waves are an important process that affect a lot of interactions in the climate system. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to use these regionally refined capabilities and to interface with the different E3SM components and include some additional physics. Also, high latitude wave heights are increasing and becoming more prominent due to climate change. E3SM, we've developed the first coupled global unstructured WaveWatch configuration for use in E3SM, and our initial very preliminary validation results have shown promise in balancing accuracy and cost with these types of regionally refined meshes. In terms of next steps, we need to kind of more rigorously evaluate the performance of these global unstructured meshes, and then we're going to move on to some one-way couplings where we send information from other components to the waves without the feedback, just as verification of making sure the coupling is correct for one way. And then we're going to move on to the two-way coupling between these components, and that'll essentially be kind of a G-case plus waves. And we're also collaborating with the interface project on wave ice couplings and developing simulations of interest to that project. So with that, thanks everyone for your attention, and I'll take some questions for the rest of the time.